Hello friends, and welcome back to my channel. So it's about time for a monthly wrap up, so let's talk about all the books I read in January. So we're going to start with books that I physically have. Some are from the library, some are books from my shelf, and then we'll talk about audiobooks. And these are in no particular order. First up, we have Big Swiss by Jen Began. So this is about a woman named Greta who is a transcriber for a local sex coach, and she lives in Hudson, New York. And she is transcribing sessions from a woman that she calls Big Swiss. And she's out and about at the dog park, and suddenly she hears this woman's voice. So she meets Big Swiss in person. So Big Swiss is married and Greta isn't, and they end up starting an affair with some seriously questionable ethics, considering that Greta knows all of Big Swiss's deepest traumas and is listening to her therapy sessions, and she's also lying to Big Swiss and giving her a fake name. So this book is ultimately an examination of things like sex, relationships, infidelity, trauma, and love. So this book kind of gave me similar vibes to The Pisces by Melissa Broder, and that has nothing to do with magical realism or the plot or anything like that, but the characters felt similar to me. There was also a lot of discussion of the main character's dog, and the dog ended up playing a big part, similar to in The Pisces. It also brought up similar feelings in me, that what was happening was really disturbing at times, but I couldn't look away. I actually did listen to this on audio, but since I have a physical copy, I wanted to show it. But the audiobook is really great because they have multiple readers for the different parts. So the sex therapist has his own voice, Big Swiss has her own voice, the narrator has her own voice, and some of the side characters have their own voices too. So that was really cool, and I really enjoyed the listening experience of this book. So I did enjoy this. I think I would probably give it 4 stars. It wasn't an all-time favorite, but I did find it to be compelling and interesting. So that's Big Swiss. So next up, we have a couple of rereads, starting with The Shame by McKenna Goodman. So if you watched my reading vlog, you saw me finishing up this book. Honestly, I still really enjoyed it. I don't know that I enjoyed it as much as I did when I read it the first time. I think that this particular reading would be 4 stars, though I'm gonna keep the rating at 5 stars because that was my initial impression of this book. So if you're a longtime viewer of this channel, you've heard me talk about The Shame. It's a book about a mother in the countryside who is isolated from other adults and is looking for a form of escapism and really just wants to be heard and found as valuable in society beyond her role as a mother. So the themes and the topics of this book are still really interesting to me, but just having already read it and knowing what happens in the book, I don't think that it was as gripping as it was the first time I read it. Next up is another reread, and it's An American Marriage by Tayari Jones. This is a book that I gave 5 stars when I read it initially, and I still would give it 5 stars. So this book follows a couple, Celestial and Roy, and at the start of the book, they're young and in love and recently married. Their marriage is very passionate, but there are also some tensions between them. They go to visit Roy's parents, and they stay in this hotel, and a woman at the hotel is assaulted, and Roy is actually mistaken to be the person who assaulted this woman, even though he was in bed with Celestial all night. This is not a spoiler, but he ends up going to prison for that assault. Most of this book just follows the time that Roy is in prison and what unfolds between them, and also what unfolds in Celestial's life. So this is a love story, but it's also a really important commentary on race and incarceration. So that's An American Marriage. My last reread of this month is Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo. This book has my heart. I love it so much. I give it 5 stars when I read it initially, and it made me cry on an airplane. So this time I also gave it 5 stars, though I did not cry. Honestly, I had read this several years ago and had not remembered exactly what happened in this book. So it was still pretty shocking having already read it. So this story follows a couple named Yajide and Akin. They live in Nigeria, and Akin's family essentially comes to them and says, you have to take a second wife in order to bear children. So this other woman comes into their family, and there are incredible tensions, obviously, between Yajide and this other woman. Yajide does end up getting pregnant, but this has some greater implications for their family, and the book is ultimately about the breakdown of this family and all the complications that arise. This book is incredibly heartbreaking without without spoiling it, there are several deaths in this book that are very upsetting. This book is incredibly heartbreaking, but incredibly powerful, and I think that if you can handle the sadness of it all, I would highly recommend this book. Okay, getting into a couple of nonfiction books, we have The Age of Magical Overthinking by Amanda Montell. So when I read this in my recent vlog, I said that I would withhold judgment until this video. So here are my thoughts. I pretty much picked this book up automatically because I loved her book Cultish, and Cultish is about the connection between linguistics and psychology as it relates to cults and cult-like organizations. This book was supposed to be about cognitive bias and magical thinking in our current society. And the reality of this book is I found it to be incredibly disjointed. It is basically a collection of personal essays strung together very loosely by this overarching topic that I really struggled to find. I actually thought that my reading comprehension was out of whack when I read this because I kept feeling like I could not find the thesis or through line throughout this book, and it really felt overly personal for no reason. It really just felt like a collection of personal essays, and that is not what I was expecting from this book. Had I gone into this book believing it to be a memoir or a personal essays, I may have felt differently, but her writing is typically more academic and through a particular lens, and the vibe of this book just did not fit with my perception of what it would be. I also felt like there was a lot of pseudopsychology in this book, and I did not feel like Montell actually came to any helpful conclusions about any of the topics she discussed. So I was just left feeling like I didn't understand the purpose of this book, and I didn't feel like I really gleaned anything from reading it. So unfortunately, I gave this one 2 stars, and I'm pretty disappointed. Next up, I have another nonfiction, and this is Good Inside by Dr. Becky Kennedy. This is a book that talks about the principle of people being good inside and parenting in such a way where you keep that in mind. So it's kind of a gentle parenting book, but it gives a lot of actionable advice about how to do that and how to manage your feelings and expectations as a parent. So as I've said before, I'm not quite in the life stage where I need this book, but I find it really interesting to learn about different perspectives on parenting and kind of gain information all around. So this book, I think I would give 3 stars because it was a book that was informational and interesting to read, but I found the reading experience to be average, and there was nothing that I was like, wow, this is an amazing book and I'd love to read it again. It's just basically an informational book, and I feel like 3 stars is like a fair rating for that. Next up, I have a book that was also highly anticipated, and that's Come and Get It by Kylie Reed. Her debut novel, Such a Fun Age, was an absolute favorite. I've reread it multiple times and really loved the themes and the discussion and the writing and the different perspectives. So when I saw that she released a new book, I was really excited about it and just wanted to jump right in. Unfortunately, I have heard a lot of really negative things about this book, and I'm worried that that has kind of swayed me in a negative direction, but I do feel like the point of this book wasn't as clear to me as with Such a Fun Age. This book is set at the University of Arkansas, and it follows a couple of different characters. So there's Millie, who's a transfer student and an RA. Then there's Agatha, who's a professor. There are also 3 girls who are in the dorm who are also sort of main characters. So this book has a lot of main characters. There are issues between these 3 roommates. Millie has to kind of step in and deal with that. Millie and Agatha also start a relationship. So I would say that this book is primarily a character study, and it also centers around the concept of ethics. I think that the point of this book is a lot less clear, and I found the plot to be a lot more meandering, and I don't know that this book really resolved anything at the end. I do think that the concept of ethics and the ways in which that shows up throughout the book is very interesting. I also loved that this book talked a lot about Arkansas and mentioned towns and areas that I've been to frequently, so that was pretty fun. Overall, I think I would give this book 3 stars. I felt like it was a very middle of the road experience. There were things I liked, there were things I didn't like, and I don't know that this is going to be a particularly memorable read over time. Okay, let's get into my favorite book of January. That's My Husband by Maud Ventura. So this book follows a woman who has been married to her husband for like 15 years, and she is pretty obsessed with him and is very concerned that he will leave her or that he will lose interest in her. She's pretty obsessive and is really concerned with creating this perfect life and perfect environment for her husband to come home to every day. She also takes a lot of notes about details about her husband and advice about love and relationships. So this takes place in 1 week, and over the week we see lots of different little transgressions that her husband does, and she notes all of these down, and she starts to sort of try to mess with him by creating these little punishments throughout the week. So she's trying to get him to understand how he's affecting her emotionally, and she wants to regain that connection. There is a pretty interesting twist at the end, but obviously I won't spoil that for you if you do want to read this. I think this is best categorized as a literary thriller. I would say that this is a thriller that leans more on the psychological rather than any like big plot points. And really what's the scariest thing about this book is the idea that your partner can fall out of love with you, and also that your partner can get so lost in the domestic grind that they don't even notice when something's wrong and they don't even react. It's scary to think about losing the person you love, but it's also scary to think that your partner doesn't see you anymore. This is translated, and I found the writing to be absolutely stunning. I have so many like tabs throughout this book because there's just so many great quotes, but truly a gripping book, and I highly recommend it. Moving right along, we have 2 books that I buddy read with my best friend Bex. They're both in a series that we read the first couple of books of when we were kids. So this is the Casson family series, and you probably have not heard of it, but if you have, let me know, because I feel like this is not a book series that I've heard much about. This book series was a childhood favorite for both of us, so this month we read Permanent Rose and Caddy Ever After, and we're gonna continue the series next month. So to wrap this up, let's go over the books that I don't physically have. The first one is My Time to Stand by Gypsy Rose Blanchard. This is a memoir by Gypsy Rose and read by her. I read the audiobook. If you don't know about this case, you're probably living under a rock. Everybody's heard about it, I feel like, but it's a very widely talked about case, and there are several documentaries about the case, as well as The Act, which is a Hulu series based on the events that happened. So I'm not gonna go over what the case is about, but essentially Gypsy Rose recently got out of prison and then wrote this memoir about her life, and I think I would give this book 3 stars. I found it interesting, but there were also aspects of it that were just kind of meh, so 3 stars feels like an appropriate rating. And the final book that I read in January was Ordinary Human Failings by Megan Nolan. So I heard about this book from a Jack Edwards video, and apparently it is super popular and a lot of people have really enjoyed it. It's a pretty short book, and I've read another book by Megan Nolan previously, which I enjoyed. So this book is set in England and Ireland, and it's about a family whose young daughter causes the accidental death of a baby. The narration kind of bounces around from different people, one of which is a journalist who is sort of studying and following this case. Ultimately, I think this book is mostly about generational trauma and the things that happened throughout the generations that led up to this event. I found this book to be incredibly moving. There were some sections that were really painful and hard to read. I found the girl's mother's perspective the most interesting, and the discussion of her pregnancy and sort of the trauma that began this young girl's life. So I gave this book 4 stars. I didn't feel like it was a 5 out of 5 favorite book, but I really deeply loved some of these characters and really felt for them, and it was a book that I felt like had something really important to say. So those were the 12 books that I read in January. I think it was overall a really good reading month. I read a lot, and I found a couple of books that I really enjoyed, as well as doing some rereads that were also really fun. So let me know what you read in January and what you're hoping to read in February. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.